Welcome, everyone. I'm Jennifer Mays, one of the co-directors of the National Center for Child Traumatic Stress at Duke University and UCLA.
And I'm Lisa Maya Jackson, also a co-director at the National Center, and we are here for the inaugural episode of our co-director download series.
Yes, this is a new season, so to speak, for our series, which has been going on for some time, where we interview leaders in the National Child Traumatic Stress Network.
And we are very lucky today to have Sarah Gardner with us. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Sarah is the Director of Clinical Services for Child and Family Traumatic, Clinical Services at the Center for Child and Family Traumatic Stress at the Kennedy Krieger Institute, which is an NCTSN affiliate center. And she's a funded member of the Family Informed Trauma Treatment Center, the FITT Center at the University of Maryland, which is a network category 2 site. And her primary area of expertise is intergenerational trauma patterns and engaging families who experience marginalization related to racism, poverty, and other negative social conditions. And Sarah developed FamilyLive, which is an innovative family therapy model which helps caregivers with trauma histories to develop parenting skills. And as a network member since 2003, she's been a leader in the area of family and caregiver partnerships, which is something that we're going to be talking to you a bit about today. So welcome again.
Thanks, Jen. It was nice to hear all that.
Fantastic. Sarah, let's start at the beginning. How did you get interested in the field of child trauma?
I appreciate that question very much, because you could always wonder, how did you really get interested? Or how did you get interested in terms of what you might say in a public forum? But let me just give you this answer. I got to the clinic I'm in now as a trainee in the late 1980s. And when I arrived here, I was very drawn by the work being done in the clinic related to children and families in the child welfare system, and then generally families negatively affected by broader social conditions. And of course, I'm a social worker, and social workers care about person and environment, and we're interested in advocating for change, etc. But in my clinical development as a young clinician, I started to get very interested in the intergenerational dynamics in families related to trauma histories. And there really wasn't much out there specifically for addressing that. But as a program, we started talking in the early to mid 90s about children affected by cumulative and repetitive trauma. So we were using that language, we were researching along those lines, we were writing along those lines, and developing treatment methods to address those kids and families. So I think that's probably a good summary of how it went for me, getting into the field, getting into practice, and then noticing things and kind of following that line of development.
Thanks. We'll have to ask you about the real story after the recording.
You may get a hint.
Well, maybe can you tell us a little bit about how you got your start in the NCTSN, sort of what drew you to the NCTSN, and what has sustained your commitment to the network over time?
Again, all credit to the program I'm in, and the director of the program and the department, Dr. Elizabeth Thompson, was instrumental in getting us into the National Child Traumatic Stress Network in 2003. I wasn't written into that grant, but because I had a leadership role here, I was very involved in helping meet some of the grant requirements and deliverables. And we enjoyed funding for a very long period of time in that through several category 3s, and then somewhere in the mid 2000s, we got funded in a joint project with the Family Informed Trauma Treatment Center. So there was a period where I had both a 2 and a 3 that I was involved with. And I remain funded in the Family Informed Trauma Treatment Center. And I really I'll just say a couple of things. The network raises the standard of care. I know that is a goal, but it's actually a truth in terms of the outcomes. So for me personally, it's the excellence of the work that shows up and is built into the mission. My own horizons have been broadened, and I can say that my programs or our programs' horizons have broadened, which has improved the care. So it's a give and take. It's not just what we're getting from NCTSN, but it's what we're putting back into NCTSN. And I know, several stories of individuals whose lives have been changed, people that work within the program, and certainly families' lives have changed. So I'm even getting a little tingly talking about it. I mean, it is more than the sum of its parts. It can sometimes be an interesting and confusing world to be a part of. It was always remote, kind of by definition. Now it's doubly remote. But I continue to feel like it's broadening my own horizons and improving our program, and also giving us resources for treatment and training. We have a lot of people in our program going out and doing training, and the first stop is the NCTSN website.
Oh, Sarah, just love to see the passion in your voice. And speaking of contributions, were a longtime co-chair of the Partnering with Youth and Families collaborative group. Can you tell us why partnering is so integral to trauma-informed care?
I'll tell you more than you want to know about why partnering is so integral to trauma.
Go for it.
First of all, I went to that summit in 2005 in Northern Virginia. It's like, how did all that time go by? And that was really life-changing for me. It was highly educational. I already had kind of an inclination. I had a strong family orientation. I think I already had kind of an inclination towards a partnership stance, but I got schooled at that summit. It was extremely helpful. And, there had been some committee work before then, but then it really developed momentum after then. I have stayed in the committee with a formal role, and now I guess I have an emeritus role. It's the only emeritus role I'll probably ever have. I'll take it with that committee, and it is my favorite part of the network. And part of it is that I appreciate that it's a very approachable group. So it's a variety of individuals, consumers, providers, or both, people who are consumers and providers, who may not all only identify as professionals with advanced degrees, who are model developers, et cetera. So I really like the democratic context of that group. Back to your question, it does get a little personal for me in that I think it's well known that trauma is a control sapping experience, and trauma-informed care should be about control building. You cannot possibly do that if there's not some partnership framework for the work, so to speak. And I tend to focus a lot, as Jen mentioned, about skill building for parents. I tend to focus a lot on skill building. So you're not going to undo the bad stuff that happened. You're not going to get to redo it necessarily, but there's a lot that's hopeful about developing skills. And to me, that also, it has to happen in partnership. And then I'll just make a final point about negative social conditions, which I already mentioned are of great and abiding interest to me. You cannot really get into a conversation about social change if you're not figuring out how to do partnership work and shared power, if you will, with people affected by negative social conditions. So I'm really interested at the individual level and maybe even at the broader level in helping people through this work, through the intervention, develop their own skills for changing their personal negative conditions and their broader negative social conditions.
Thanks, Sarah. It's
Welcome.
sort of fun to think back to that original meeting that was really the foundation of all of the work that goes on now, that started started in 2005, not knowing where that would lead over and how long it would continue in the network for all that time. And also I appreciate the way you're describing the Partnering with Youth and Families group in a way that sounds very inviting and like an invitation to folks who might want to come into that space, because I think all that you're describing is really resonating with folks in the network, especially now more than ever. And it sounds like that group is a good place to come to be part of those sorts of conversations. And I guess the follow-up question is, are there sort of activities, accomplishments, success stories from the Partnering with Youth and Families group that you're particularly proud of or that you want to mention?
Yeah, that's another great thing about the group. I mean, you know, writing research papers and publishing and all that is great. I haven't done as much of it personally. I've done some. But what's one cool thing about that group is we've been able to produce and disseminate products that have helped the sites. One key product is the Pathways to Partnerships document, which is oddly very relevant still. And it's not as stale as you would think it might be. It keeps showing up when I'm doing searches online. There are tools in there that are still pretty darn fresh. So that held up, probably needs or could benefit from some freshening up, but I think people still benefit from using it. It also, off of that Pathways to Partnerships came several associated tools, for example, compensation for consumer participants in advisory boards, et cetera. All that stuff is very important. And we still have work to do on that, I would say, as a network and frankly, as a field. And then I'm also really proud of the Sharing Power tip sheet and reflection tool, which only took, 86 iterations to get to a final product. And it actually started as a way of helping clinicians get comfortable with the idea that consumers might benefit from peer-to-peer relationships, and that peer-to-peer brings its own value separate from the more intervention-oriented services that we provide. So that Sharing Power tip sheet and reflection tool, which has been out 5 or so years now, maybe 6, is still very relevant. It talks a lot about various forms of power reducing and client invalidating experiences that we should all be on the lookout for. So I'm plugging that. That's a commercial moment. And then I would say there's another nice thing that I'm proud of that I was just looking at today. It's an advisory board FAQ, and it's about, how to start them, what to do with them. I think the category 3s all over the country have grant goals they need to fulfill that are about partnership, and we're trying to build the technical support for that remotely. I'm working on one right now that is a companion to that advisory board FAQ that's from the consumer's perspective. What do you wish you had known before you said yes to joining an advisory board? What would have prepared you, that sort of thing. And then I think there's the other thing I would just mention is that a lot of what we've done within that group is learn how to co-train. So those with so-called learned expertise and those with so-called, I call it lived expertise, not lived experience, learning how to partner and go out on the road together, so to speak, and do co-training is really, really important, because if you can't stand up and co-train with a colleague who comes from a different point of view, it's going to be hard to deliver the message. So those are my main sources of pride.
Wow. Love it, and love hearing the power of collaboration that took and your involvement. It's just fantastic to hear. What are some of the barriers and challenges to partnering that the Partnering with Youth and Families group is trying to address?
There are a couple things, when I first thought of this question, there are a couple things that are more kind of administrative, and then there may be a couple of things that are more endemic to this kind of collaboration. On the administrative side, leadership changes are challenging. So when you get continuity can be great. Sometimes people get stale. I haven't asked anybody to tell me that I'm stale yet, so I just keep working on continuity. There's a lot of lost institutional memory and momentum when people move on, either from their sites or from their committee roles, et cetera. So leadership changes can be challenging. Trying to intelligently integrate the family and youth perspectives is challenging. This is the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. And, I already talked about, or Jen talked about in my introduction, that my clinical expertise is really family therapy with families affected by intergenerational transmissions, and specifically caregiver work. trying to blend the family and youth perspectives or family and child perspectives in this committee is something we're always paying attention to. We haven't really solved it. We just try to keep paying attention to it. And then another one I would say is trying to bring our thinking into accessible and transferable formats. So right now we're working on a curriculum that could be accessible to sites and other people that are interested, sort of the 101 of how to do it, why to do it, the principles and tools, et cetera. But really being smart about getting that information up and out takes some energy. And then I guess I would say, finally, one needs a lot, if one is coming from the provider side, one needs a lot of self-awareness related to how one comes off in these different settings where it's kind of a consumer-provider partnership. And there's a risk that providers will overfunction. There's a risk that and sometimes this can happen in treatment too, treatment partnerships, but when we're talking about, say, shared projects, there's a risk that providers will overmanage. We may be driven by, the schedules, the deliverables, et cetera. Balancing that with making really genuine space for people coming from a consumer perspective to express their experience takes a lot of, I would say, kind of discipline and self-awareness. So those are my reflections on some of the challenges.
Thanks. I'm just resonating with what you were saying about the challenges of making genuine space. I feel like that's been the theme of my day, if not my past 6 months. So very, very well put. I guess our last question is to ask you what advice you might give to someone who's coming into the network new, either early career professional joining a network center, a new network site coming into the network. What sort of, what wisdom would you like to impart to those folks?
Well, I always start with this. In any question like this, is set limits on your availability. I mean, which is really a point about boundaries. I'm kind of fierce about this topic. I mean, you don't survive over the long haul if you don't set and hold your own boundaries and your own limitations. I think that that whole idea of marathon, not a sprint, which is comes up in the network all the time. This work is a marathon, not a sprint. You will not get it done in one grant cycle. You'll not get it done in one meeting. So be really faithful about figuring out your own limitations, and then find things that enhance or complement what you're already doing. And so for me, what that has meant is sort of the clinical side of the coin about intervention, and then this partnership theme or kind of set of activities, if you will. They really complement each other very well. So there are efficiencies in that. And then finally, and I hadn't thought of this before, but I'll say it now, I really appreciate the way people just jump in. That's not actually my style. I'm pretty reserved. I force myself in and then jump out. But lots of people I'm noticing in the network, and perhaps the kind of heavily remote environment we're in right now helps with this. People jump in, people jump out. People join the call, people help with the outline. They send a PowerPoint slide, they do a thing. And I appreciate the flexibility that I see in people doing that. And I think that knowledge is moving so fast right now, and there's such a big demand for it, that I would say anybody coming into the network should do two things: protect their time and not be shy about jumping in.
I love that. I love that, because I think we wouldn't be a network if people didn't jump in. But like you were saying, feeling free to just jump in with something small, jump in with something big, jump in now, don't jump in later. Having that flexibility, I think, is also what makes it pretty unique.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks.
Thank you
for
so
speaking
much.
with us.
It's such a pleasure, and we really appreciate your wonderful words and
you.
contributions and sharing your time with us.
Thank you so much. I now have to make sure I meet my writing deadline, since I've said publicly what I'm working on.
That's right.
Another
Great.
team.
We can't wait to read it.
Exactly.
Thanks, Sarah.
Talk to you.
Sarah.
Bye-bye.